Ready to move to the next level in your product career? I'm Shobhit from Intentional Product Manager. Join me as we discuss ways to help you stand out in your job search and your career so you can have more impact and make more money. Welcome to the Intentional Product Manager podcast. If you've ever had a toxic boss who made you question your abilities, this episode is for you. A toxic work environment can leave deep scars, self-doubt, hesitation, imposter syndrome. And when it's time to move on, that lingering negativity can hold you back from confidently landing your next role. I've been there, I know. To help us navigate this, I'm not the expert. I'm thrilled to welcome Sarah Ramsey. She's a high performance coach, author of Becoming Toxic Person Proof, a book that has helped countless professionals reclaim their confidence after toxic relationships, whether that's personal or professional. Today, she's going to share how you can rebuild your confidence and step into your next role with clarity and strength. So let's dive in. Sarah, first of all, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Shobhit. And what he didn't say is now that Shobhit and I work together and I help people in the IPM world and intentional product manager show up as their best selves to that next role. So excited to be here and chat.
Sarah's our star mindset, executive leadership coach, and she's helping so many folks. Okay, so Sarah, you worked with many high achievers who've gone through toxic situations. Tell us, why does working under a toxic boss affect confidence so deeply?
So with product managers, they're problem solvers, right? And so product managers are obviously intelligent. And so they never met a problem they couldn't solve. So they work harder and think, oh, I'll solve this problem of my boss being mad at me or always frustrated or things always changing. And, there's a lot of self-trust built when you see a problem, you solve it, and you feel better, right? But if you solve a problem that doesn't really have a solution because the finish line's always moving or it's always changing, it can really erode self-trust. And when I'm talking to people in mindset coaching and they're saying things like, I'm just kind of negative in my head, or I tried so hard and it didn't work, that can be a really frustrating version of yourself to bring into, especially in interviews where you have to sell yourself and stand out among competition and prove yourself again. And so it definitely can affect self-trust. And there's a lot of greatness in psychological safety. I know you're former Google, and Google was famous for, allowing failure, right? And the psychological safety of allowing failure for creativity. And so when employees are like, oh, great, it's safe for me to try things, that's when innovation can happen. Or great things. And if they get nervous, the innovation shrinks, right? As I'm sure you've seen, right? And it can also obviously encourage imposter syndrome, which when we talk to people with an intentional product manager and they're nervous about job interviews, oftentimes you hear about imposter syndrome, and it can feel like everybody else knows all these things that you don't, which in turn hurts selling yourself in an interview, which can cost you thousands and tens of thousands, hundred thousands of dollars.
I love how you talked about product managers priding themselves at solving problems, and here they're facing something that they can't solve, and they're suddenly stuck.
Well, we met, but before we had worked together in the regards to toxic people, I called it smart girl syndrome, right? And so smart girl syndrome, obviously I'm a female, smart girl syndrome was like, I never met a problem I couldn't solve. I'll solve this too. And then the finish line kept moving or they kept getting frustrated. And, it's why I love product managers so much. And it's why I love talking to product managers. And product managers are so frustrated if they're problem solvers. They want to solve a problem. They're comfortable in ambiguity. But if there's a toxic person, you can't really figure out a toxic person. They just change their mind and they're just mean. Or a toxic work culture, right? It's just a no-win situation.
Talking about toxic work culture and environment, but how can someone recognize that they've been impacted by a toxic workplace? Like, what are some of the first red flags you might see?
Definitely feeling unsettled all the time. I mean, work is always work. There's going to be good days and bad days, of course, but if there's this pattern of shrinking, a pattern of second guessing yourself more than usual, a pattern of feeling as if you're never good enough, a pattern of feeling like you're never sure what mood someone's going to be in. Those are obviously signs of not the best work environment. And I want to say very clearly, this is a pattern of behavior. I have bad days. You have bad days. Everybody has bad days, right? This isn't something where somebody has one bad day and all of a sudden they're toxic, right? That term can get super overused and that kind of thing. But, when it's weeks upon weeks and you just feel exhausted being around the work environment, not or feel like you can't ever quite figure out what's going on, or you feel like you're uncertain around things, that can obviously be a toxic culture. I was in a executive leadership meeting and they talked about the words clarity is kind. And I love that. And because there are work environments that it's like someone's obviously just like a jerk or whatever, and then there's work environments that just like need a little tweak sometimes, right? And I love that version of clarity is kind. I'm obsessed with good communication, right? And it's like, okay, can I bring my best version to the conversation and provide the most clarity so that I can create good solutions, right? And so if there's constant chaos, that's a sign of toxicity, right? And if there's never any clarity, right? Because you're always going to be second guessing yourself.
People understand now, cool, these are the red flags. This is what happens. When we fast forward, many product managers coming from toxic environments, they struggle to own their value in interviews. Tell us some of the common thought patterns or symptoms you've seen of that happening.
I'm so glad we're talking about this. It's something I see all the time, and it hurts people so much in underselling themselves, undervaluing themselves, and in a job search can cost them tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So definitely, owning what's yours. And then if it's not yours, that being okay too, right? But rewriting that internal narrative of like, okay, this is my responsibility. But if there was especially if you have like an angry boss or something, they're always yelling, right? It's like, that is not my fault. Right. If I'm always jumping around someone's moods and they're ugly and say mean things, right? Just because they said it does not mean it's true. And this is really tough because you also have to take ownership, right? I mean, you have to take ownership of like, what do I need to work on? What is my fault? Right? Because we all have things we have to work on, right? But a toxic boss will often dump a lot of things on you that are not your fault. And it's just because they were in a bad mood or in a frustrating situation or blaming you and blaming others. And it's really important to separate those facts from your feelings. They can make you feel like crap, right? And I often see people hesitate, even in a job search, if they've had a bad boss or a toxic work environment, they can stall out on even finding something else because they start to lose hope that it can be better, right? Which is really sad because there's obviously great work environments, right? Like ours, right? And you really wanting that for people and, owning your success and where you've been good, where you've been great, I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but you and I went through that exercise of a brag book that you and I have done, right? And I talk about it on Mindset, talked about it today, right? And it's after a toxic situation, it can feel like nothing you ever do is good enough. And in a job search, it's absolutely 100% crucial to have your strengths at the tip of your tongue. And that's what I've spent all day talking to our clients about. And just like, okay, what are you good at? What are your strengths? And of course, everyone's like, oh, I hate selling myself. I wish the work could speak for itself. And it's like, well, we all wish that, but it doesn't, does it? Right? I know. Visibility and being visible is one of your main talking points for very good reason. And in a job search, it's so crucial for those strengths, for what you're good at, for what you feel most confident in, for what you can bring to the table to be at the tip of your tongue. And so in any job search, that's crucial. But even if you've been in a toxic situation or even just a really frustrating, hard situation, it's more important than ever to make sure those strengths are easily accessible to your brain. So when you're in the high pressure situation of an interview, you can bring those strengths to the table.
I love the thinking about you're recovering from this environment and, you're carrying many of those things forward, as you mentioned, to the job search.
It's like those leeches or something, right? Like they get stuck on your skin. You feel like you have to almost peel them off, right? Which is really unfair. And I believe with all my, you and I have seen this 1,000 times. In a competitive market, you've got to bring your best self to a job search. And especially to interviews, you've got to sell yourself in those interviews. It may not be fair that you have to go through that mental stuff of okay, I've got to rework that mindset or I've got to pull in my strengths. It may not be fair. Your boss shouldn't have done that to you. But from birth to death, We are stuck with ourselves, right? And if you want to make more money, if you want to stand out in a crowded market, there's going to be some work involved. But it's fun work, believing in yourself again, of speaking with confidence again, of knowing what you're good at and bringing that to the workplace, right? It doesn't all have to be terrible. We kind of think about like therapy or something. It's like terrible work and we're crying and, it doesn't have to be that, right? It's really connecting with your strengths again.
Let's talk more about now, okay, how do you start to rebuild and break free from some of these patterns? And look, confidence doesn't return overnight. It's what's the first mindset shift you recommend for someone who's trying to rebuild after a toxic experience?
Starting out with, it's not my fault. And for all my, high performers, I've worked with high performers and even, with myself, it's like, oh, but I'm like a responsible person. I want to take ownership. And those things are true. And two things can be true at the same time. And you want to bring in personal responsibility to this next phase, but you also want to hey, if my boss was a jerk to everybody, and yelled at everybody, that's not about me, right? That was about them. That wasn't about me. And I don't have to carry that into my next role. Definitely the brag book. And what that is, it's you can do for 1 minute, right? And you write down, Sarah is a good communicator. Sarah is kind. Sarah is a truth teller. Sarah is good at doing hard things, right?
Brag book might be just a term that's very unfamiliar. So do you mind just going one level deeper into what that is?
Brag book is an exercise where you have a notebook. And if you take a minute or 2 minutes and write down what you're good at, what you're proud of, it can be things from, my husband won the spelling bee when he was in elementary school. That's part of his brag book, right? It can be something, I won a race that was really hard for me. I took a chance on myself, right? It can be anything that you feel good about and that makes you feel powerful and confident. And job interviews rarely make people feel powerful and confident. Yet, in a crowded market where everyone has to sell themselves, we need them to feel powerful and confident. So the question is how, right? And the greatness about the brag book is that you trained your brain to think about it, right? It trains your brain to think about the wins and to think about things that are good about you and things that you've done that may have been hard, but you're proud of. And the more practice your brain has in building that muscle, the easier it will be for your brain to remember those things when you're nervous.
But Sarah, isn't it bad to brag?
Yes. Sure. According to my mother. No, but I'm not kidding. And so that was actually a conversation I had with someone this morning, right? And it was like, I am as readily able to talk about the things that I'm good at as the things that I'm bad at, right? And there are things I'm good at and things I'm really bad at. And when you know those things about yourself, it can just be the truth. If you only know the things you're great at, you're not self-aware. If you only know the things you're bad at, you're not going to be able to sell yourself, and it's going to cost you financially and cost your family financially. Most people want a great job because they want to provide great things for their kids, or they want to send money back home, or they want to give to their favorite charity. That term that someone we know used to say, the best way to help poor people is not to be one. And so sometimes for me personally, I had to do a lot of work to overcome talking about my strengths, right? I did not grow up in an environment that was encouraged, right? It was like, oh, you're bragging. That's no good. That's terrible. And so the way I think about it is just being a truth teller. And being a truth teller and being self-aware is saying, I'm not good at everything, but I'm not bad at everything. That's just silly, right? But a toxic boss can make you feel like you're bad at everything. And when that happens, it kind of magnifies in your brain. It makes you feel worse about yourself. And that can cost you real dollars in your job search, right? Because the more you can speak about what you're good at and your strengths, the more you can stand out among the person you're interviewing against. And talking about your strengths in a humble way. And that's the easiest way to do it. So, yeah, I personally had to get over the brag thing. I did not grow up in a culture that encouraged that in any way, but it did encourage telling the truth. And, you have kids, I have kids. When I think about my kids, if my kids think they're good at everything, that's a problem. If my kids think they're good at nothing, that's a problem. Right? And so we can model that for our kids and for the people in our lives, and certainly bring those strengths into the job search.
You mentioned breaking free from these toxic patterns. How can PMs take these toxic patterns and toxic experiences and turn it into a learning moment, something they grow from?
We see this all the time on calls with people, and product managers are such good problem solvers that sometimes they don't ask if they should be solving that problem. Okay. For example, the people who try a job search on their own for months and months and months and months and months and don't get help, right? And they often say, "Oh, I'll just try harder. I'll bring more to, I'll just double my efforts." And it's like, but what if you're doing the wrong things? Right? And in a toxic work environment, you could work harder, double your efforts, but it's not going to change the personality of your boss, right? And so if you get in the habit of that and you just think I'm gonna put my head down and work harder, you don't ask, is this a healthy system? Right? You think, what's wrong with me and how can I double my efforts in this system? But if the system isn't healthy, doubling your efforts is not the right thing. Same in a job search, right? If you're have no clue what you're doing, you don't know if it's working, you don't have a feedback loop, you don't know what's going on, but I'm just going to try harder and double my efforts. You don't stop to ask, am I doing the right things? Do I know the right things to do? How am I going to know the right things without a feedback loop? And that can actually create a toxic situation to yourself, right? Not and it's not your boss's fault at that point. But it's easy for smart people to do, and that's what I want the big takeaway to be, because the better you are at solving the problems, the more comfortable you are at solving problems, but sometimes we are not solving the right problems.
Very insightful. You mentioned the brag book. What are some other daily habits or exercises that product managers can do to start rebuilding that confidence?
Finding better problems to solve. So, if there's a great book called Buddha's Brain, and it talks about our brains are made to keep us alive, not to make us happy. Okay. And so sometimes if we have negative thoughts, those, fear, I'm afraid, I'm nervous, those things kept us alive years and years ago. Right. And so our brains, like, oh, I'm scared about this. And our brains really like lean into that. And the things that often make us happy are harder for our brains to get grippy with. Those thoughts aren't as sticky. So if you've had a toxic boss, this is terrible. I'm not good enough. I can't believe I put up with that. I should have left earlier. All those negative thoughts. It's your brain trying to keep you safe, but they're not necessarily helpful in making you happy, and they're not necessarily helpful in helping you get the energy needed for a job search or selling yourself in a job search, right? So if you notice yourself on the negative brain trail, you can really just throw that stop sign down and then think about turning left or right. Okay? And a left or right is a better problem to solve, right? So it can be taking action on signing up for a breakthrough call with us, taking action on working on your resume, taking action on networking or having putting yourself out there, but it's a better problem to solve. Solving the problem of your toxic boss and trying to change their personality, or beating yourself up for staying in that job too long or something like that. There's no real solution to that problem. So your brain, product managers' brains in particular, are problem-solving machines. So the trick is to find better problems to solve and start to get your thoughts to work for you again.
Let's just find a different problem to solve that will actually get you the outcome that you want.
And it's much easier because your brain wants a problem to solve, especially product managers, right? They're brilliant. And so when they have better problems to solve, they'll get better outcomes.
Let's continue this conversation on, okay, so now product managers say this is decided, cool, I need to find a better role. I'm transitioning out of a toxic environment. Then what's the best way to approach the job search?
Don't wait forever. And when I say don't wait forever, it's being intentional. It's not just waiting till you hit rock bottom and then it's like, I've got to get out. I'll take anything, right? Because when you get yourself in that situation, you stop looking for the right job and you start looking for another job, right? But what you want is that right job. You want to go into interviews like, okay, great. What am I really looking for? What do I really want? How am I going to be happy in this situation, rather than how do I get out, right? How do I just get out of the, one situation into another. So definitely, if you can take action, if you recognize you're in a toxic situation, you need to find another job, do it, right? Don't wait until there's that phrase like when people hit rock bottom. Rock bottom is a terrible place to do a job search from. It just is, right? And so really, making wise decisions, using that beautiful problem-solving brain to solve the problem sooner rather than later, so you can look for that right culture. Certainly interviewing them as much as they interview you, really helping, trusting your gut, trusting your instincts, getting the right questions to interview them as well and paying attention to their leadership style. Um, and then again, I have talked to so many I have been in toxic situations, I've talked to so many people who have, just brilliant people, and it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It often I there's a study done, by, Purdue, and it's talking about the ocean personalities, and the ocean personality test, and so people who are open, conscientious, and agreeable often find themselves in toxic situations more. They're more likely to find themselves in toxic situations because 'cause they're open to new experience, they're conscientious, they're gonna be take what they do very seriously, and then they're agreeable, so they don't recognize when someone may not be as agreeable, and these are wonderful qualities. These are who I want my children to be, conscientious and agreeable. Right? I want to be those things, and it can open you to toxic situations, unfortunately, but it doesn't mean you're a bad person, and certainly not letting that toxic boss determine the next win for you, and especially when it costs your family money or costs you your mental health.
We've talked about those, but do product managers coming from that toxic situation, do they sometimes get anchored on just like thinking about their worth in terms of their performance in the last role and then it affects the next role? Does that happen?
Absolutely. It's like an earworm, right? Or something that gets in your head and it's like they can't get out of it. And so it really is those little practices like the brag book or throwing down the stop sign and going left to right and connecting with your strengths and being able to speak them out loud. I wish it was like a fairy godmother, like, "Boom, and now you're fixed," right? But toxic people train you to think badly about yourself and to second guess yourself, and so it begins the process. It's not hard, but it's like little muscles you have to build again, to develop that self-trust again.
I love that, like, you have a lot of analogies around bugs and insects.
That's so funny. It's 'cause I wore my green shirt today.
It's all related to that. Okay, now you're looking for new roles. What red flags should job seekers look for in potential new managers?
For sure. You know how they talk about past employees, past situations? Do they have a blame culture? Can they accept responsibility or is it just everyone else's fault all the time? Feedback culture. Do they coach you on things or just constantly criticize? And the energy of the team, which is the best way to see it. When you see other people, do they seem energized? Do they seem alive? Do they seem, and again, this is always a balance. Of course, there's not this utopia that every day you work, it's unicorns and sunshines, right? But if you really trust your gut and you kind of like get this sense of like, everybody here seems kind of miserable, like that seems like a really bad sign, or, everyone seems concerned to speak up or like they can't talk, that would be a concern. Um, and just really trusting your gut. And I think about the way our nervous systems were built and, when there was imagine it's, 5,000 years ago and you and I are at a campfire, right? And there's a rustle in the woods and our brains go, "Oh, there's something wrong. I'm gonna run away." Like that's who survived, in our ancestors, right? And so often, really smart people who are good problem solvers think, "Oh, there's something wrong." And then they think they have to solve the problem of what is wrong before they can take action on it. And in a place like deciding on a job or something like that, just trust that your nervous system is smart. And that's science, right? It's the way our nervous systems are built. I am not asking people to do anything woo woo, but your nervous system is smart and it was built to recognize a rustle in the woods. Our language brains, is that a bear? Is that a tribesman? Is that a friend or foe? Like we would have been eaten. right? By the time you figure all that out, you would be eaten. So same with the job search. If you feel like something's wrong, there probably is. That's your gut. And which is harder. The smarter you are, sometimes the harder it is because you think, I've got to figure all that out and have a plan laid out, a roadmap per se.
Talking about rebuilding confidence, what's maybe one small step that product manager can take to start rebuild their confidence after being in this situation?
Yeah, sometimes it can help to talk and connect with someone else to make sure that it wasn't just you, right? And be like, did you experience that? Right? Did you feel good about that? And it can like really provide that clarity. And again, still being self-aware, but not taking another person's personality as your fault. Definitely anytime you can connect with your strengths, writing down your strengths. I cannot tell you how many times, and I know you've heard it, we hear, well, I just want the work to speak for itself. I don't want to have to learn how to sell myself. That will cost you money. The end. The end. It's going to cost you opportunities, right? And it's not comfortable. It wasn't comfortable for me. It's comfortable now because I've been doing it for 10 years, right? But, just that learning that process of what your strengths are and being able to speak them out loud. Do not let the first time you talk about your strengths be in a job interview. Oh my gosh, what a nightmare, right? That has to be comfortable when you're not nervous. And then, obviously practicing interview confidence. That's why, IPM has those mock interviews and that kind of thing it's they're hard. They make you nervous, right? And if you've had a toxic boss in your head, it can make you even more nervous. So just practicing that storytelling, practicing your strengths and projecting that confidence so they choose you.
Let's maybe give listeners something to remember. If they were to take away one lesson from today's conversation, what should it be?
Learn how to speak of your strengths. And typically, when someone asks me that question in about a toxic situation, it's recognizing what is your fault and what isn't. But in this context, there's an outcome attached. It's that new job. It's getting away from the toxic boss. It's making more money, right? And so for you to do that, you've got to be able to speak well of your strengths without having your boss in your head going, but you're really not that good at that, right? But you really messed up this time, right? If you bring those ugly memories into a job interview, it's going to be really hard to stand out among the competition.
I agree. Now, where can people find you and learn more about your work?
I work at Intentional Product Manager, and I'm happy too. It's in the years and years. And before this work, I did high performance coaching on my own, wrote the book, Becoming Toxic Person Proof. So they can definitely check me out on LinkedIn and connect with me at IPM.
Amazing. Sarah, first of all, thank you so much for joining us on this episode and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you for having me.
And then for everyone, if this episode resonated with you, please share it with another product manager candidate who needs to get these lessons. And if you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe. If you're on YouTube, hit like and leave comments, especially you're on one of the other podcast platforms. We have many more great conversations coming your way, and we would love for you to stay engaged. Thank you. Hey, be sure to check out our website at intentionalproductmanager.com to see how you can level up in your career.